We're being joined by Mr. Jonathan Tobin, who is the editor-in-chief of the Jewish News Syndicate. He's joining us live from New York at this moment. Now, Mr. Tobin, you know, these images that are coming out of the Gaza Strip are chilling, to say the least. What do you make of these images that are now doing the rounds, where even American media outlets like CNN are saying that some of those in those images are quite clearly civilians and not affiliated to Hamas?
Well, first, I would challenge your characterization of it as somehow incredibly chilling. Anybody who's covered wars over the last 75, 80 years knows that when you're fighting, especially a terrorist force, or even just very fanatic opponents, soldiers often have to ask have the people who surrender or who are captured stripped down so as to see that they're not booby-trapped. I'm sure the Army of India would do no different when faced with terrorists, because it's just standard. You know, these are things you can see in pictures from World War II of Allied forces or throughout warfare of the last 80 years. So, you know, I
get the argument that you're making, Mr. Tobin. You say that these are images that come about in a war. No, Mr. Tobin.
You want to see, of course it's a war. It's a war that was launched by Hamas on October 7th from their an independent Palestinian state in all but name. There was a ceasefire on October 7th. On October 6th, they violated it. They launched a war. Now they don't want the consequences of the war. And of all of the consequences of the war, the fact that prisoners, people of military age, we know that Hamas fighters, there are tens of thousands of them. They boasted of this before the war. They try to fade into the civilian population. Of course, they're going to be investigated. How can you differentiate them otherwise? They're not carrying their ID tags.
Mr. Tobin, the argument that you're making is because it is war, these are kind of images that are expected, and these images have been reported in previous wars. But what is also true is that when images like that come up, then there is criticism which is valid. Now, the question that I want to ask you is, in this campaign that Israel has carried out for more than 60 days now, 17,000 people have ended up losing their lives. Almost about 40% of everyone who's been killed is said to be a child, not the age of a combatant. How does Israel respond to that kind of criticism? And is Israel succeeding militarily? And what does Israel have to show militarily in terms of what it has achieved in destroying Hamas?
Well, first of all, I think we know all those statistics come from Hamas. We know that a lot of people have died. We know they don't differentiate between Hamas operatives, Hamas fighters, terrorists, and civilians. But of course, we also know that as terrorists, they hide among civilians. They shoot missiles from civilian buildings. They deliberately try to cloak themselves with as many civilians as possible. They've boasted, their leaders in Qatar, who live in safety, saying that they'll fight to the last Palestinian civilian. This is a tragedy, but they cannot be allowed. Israel, which was happy to let them rule their independent state before October 6th, before October 7th, they violated the ceasefire. They showed their barbarism with the largest mass slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust. They're not going to be allowed to get away with mass murder. What does Israel have to show for it? The answer is that it is bit by bit taking military control of Gaza and ensuring that Hamas is not going to be able to attack Israeli civilians. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis, not just the people who were killed, were raped or kidnapped. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis have been forced to flee their homes in southern Israel. They're refugees. They're living in hotels. They have to be able to return to their homes in safety. That's Israel's goal. And as long as Hamas refuses to surrender, refuses to give up the hostages, continues to cloak themselves and to hide behind civilians, the war will continue, but it will not continue indefinitely. Gaza is not, a vast desert. Israel is slowly, bit by bit, taking down their tunnels. They're coming out of the tunnels. You see pictures of
Mr. Tobin,
prisoners.
we're running out of time.
Some of them
Mr. Tobin,
let
me just ask you this quick final question. We heard what Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State of the United States, has said, where he said that the Israeli government, the IDF, should ensure the safety of the Palestinian civilians who've got nothing to do with this conflict. How does Israel respond to criticism that is coming in from the staunchest ally of Israel?
Well, first of all, Israel tries very hard, as much as any army in the world. Indeed, the U.S. Army has sent soldiers over the last years to learn from the Israelis how to protect civilians. There is a civil war going on within the Biden administration. The top leadership, Biden, Blinken, most congressional Democrats support Israel, some on the far left,
All right.
whom Biden doesn't want to alienate or pressuring them to distance themselves from Israel. Biden is trying to basically talk out of both sides of his mouth. He's not going to abandon Israel, but he is trying to.
But is Israel feeling the pressure from the Americans? When you say that Biden will not abandon the Israelis, but he's talking out of both sides of his mouth, but is Israel feeling the pressure from the Americans?
I think there's some pressure, but even as weak as Prime Minister Netanyahu is right now politically, he knows he cannot allow Hamas to emerge victorious from this. They have to be completely eliminated. If it means saying no to President Biden, he'll do it.
All right, Mr. Sobin, thank you very much indeed for joining us and getting us that perspective. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.